Good morning. Please take your seats. As you walk into a courtroom, what do you see? The heavy wooden bench, the gavel, the thick books of law. It all feels like a mechanical process. Justice, simply a matter of paying a fine for a broken rule. However, after decades of sitting on this bench in Providence, I've learned that the law is far more than cold equations. It's about humanity, compassion, and looking deeper beyond the paperwork. The reality is the law can be a blunt tool, but without a human heart behind it, it becomes something much more dangerous. Sometimes those pieces of paper are not just about violations or negligence. Sometimes they're screaming for understanding, for a human touch. The question is, are we willing to listen? It was a cold Tuesday morning. The courtroom was filled, the air thick with anxiety, as people waited to face the consequences of their everyday mistakes. The radiators hummed, fighting off the harsh New England winter. We'd already gone through the routine cases, expired meters, speeding violations, a few confused students. Then my clerk handed me a file that made me pause, readjust my glasses, and take a breath. The amount owed was a shocking $2,000. No major criminal offenses here, just a collection of parking tickets that had piled up over months, combined with late fees, collection penalties, and administrative charges. The kind of debt that can destroy someone struggling to make ends meet. It was a case of the city of Providence versus Sarah Jenkins. The moment I called her name, I braced myself. When you see a bill that large, you expect to deal with someone angry at the system, trying to dodge the consequences. But Sarah, the woman who slowly approached the podium, shattered all my expectations in an instant. She was in her late 60s, wearing a faded black wool coat too large for her small frame. Her movements were slow, not from age, but from a crushing weight that seemed to press her down with each step. She clutched a disorganized pile of papers as though they were the only thing keeping her together. Her eyes, hollow and rimmed with red, looked up at me, not with anger, but with complete surrender. This was not the face of someone trying to game the system. This was someone who had been drowning in pain, and the court was just another wave that threatened to pull her under. I looked at the prosecutor's list, a relentless series of parking violations. Overnight parking, no permit, expired meter, blocking a street sweeping zone. The fines had grown like a virus, with original tickets turning into an unmanageable mountain of debt. "Ma'am," I began, leaning forward with a soft tone, "the city says you owe $2,000 for parking violations from last winter. Can you tell me what happened?" She hesitated, her hands trembling as she shuffled through the papers. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I know, Your Honor, I know they are my tickets. I just couldn't move the car. I didn't have the money then, and I definitely don't have it now." There was no elaborate excuse, no complaint about the system or the broken meters. She simply accepted the weight of her situation. That's when I knew I had to look beyond the numbers. I needed to understand her story. I took a closer look at the locations of the tickets. There was a pattern. Almost every citation was issued on the same block, right next to Providence Hope Hospital. But this wasn't a busy area, no shopping malls or nightclubs here, just a quiet, unassuming street. "Mrs. Jenkins," I asked gently, "I see most of these tickets were issued on the same block. Were you working at the hospital?" She shook her head slowly. A tear escaped and traced down her weathered cheek. "No, Your Honor. My husband, Thomas, he was on the oncology ward. He was dying. The nurses said it could happen any moment. I couldn't leave him alone. I couldn't go down to feed a meter." In that moment, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. You could hear the soft rain tapping against the windows. The whispers from the gallery stopped. They were no longer concerned with their own minor violations. They were witnessing something much deeper, a heart-wrenching human story. I looked at this frail woman, her devotion to her dying husband clear, and realized something profoundly tragic. While she stayed by his side, the city was outside, placing tickets under her windshield wiper. She had been holding his hand as he slipped away, while the system blindly collected debt for what amounted to a broken meter. Her voice cracked as she continued. "There was one afternoon I went down to feed the meter. I was gone for maybe 20 minutes. When I returned, his breathing had become shallow. The alarms went off. He thought I had left him to die alone. I promised him right there, 'I'm not leaving until you go home or until God calls you.' So I stayed. I slept in the chair beside his bed. How could a parking meter matter in such a moment? But for the city it did. They saw a car occupying space, and they issued tickets without understanding the human tragedy unfolding just yards away. As I looked at her death certificate and cross-referenced it with the citations, the system's failure became all too clear. The The last ticket was issued just hours after her husband passed away. Less than 24 hours after his death, she was punished for being a grieving widow. The city charged her for a missed payment window, a penalty for mourning. "Mrs. Jenkins," I said, my voice steady but filled with empathy, "I see these dates. The city charged you for a ticket issued the morning after your husband passed away. They fined you for grieving." She nodded silently, tears flowing freely now. I tried to explain to them, but they told me, bereavement is not a valid excuse. In that moment, I felt the heavy weight of the system. It was cold, blind, and unfeeling. But I knew that I couldn't let this stand. I looked at the pile of tickets in front of me, the stack that had turned her world upside down. The city wanted $2,000 from her. But how could I uphold this? How could I demand that she pay for the crime of choosing love over a parking meter? I shook my head and made my decision. Every one of these citations, the late fees, the collection penalties, they are all dismissed. The gavel fell with a soft thud, ending her nightmare with the city. But as she stood there, stunned by the relief, I knew my job wasn't finished. Her debt was gone, but the grief remained. "How are you surviving now?" I asked gently. She wiped her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm alone. No children. No family left. I've been so scared of these tickets. I've been skipping meals to save enough money to pay them." My heart broke hearing this. A grieving widow was starving herself to pay off parking fines. "Sarah, you are not going to jail, but you need to take care of yourself," I said firmly. I reached into my desk and pulled out an envelope. "This is a fund from people who want to help. It contains $500. Go get yourself a proper meal and take care of yourself." She looked up, shocked and confused. "Why? Why are you doing this for me?" "Because you are not invisible," I replied softly. "For months the system treated you like a criminal, but today we treat you like a human being." As she clutched the envelope to her chest, something beautiful happened. One by one, people in the gallery stood up and placed money on the podium. Strangers, people who had witnessed her suffering, reached out with simple acts of kindness. In the end, Sarah Jenkins walked out of that courtroom not just free from her debt, but surrounded by a community that showed her compassion. The system had failed her, but humanity had stepped in. This is why we have courts, not just to uphold the law, but to ensure that justice, true justice, is human. When a judge stops to ask why, to look beyond the tickets and deadlines, that's when the law has a fighting chance. Sarah left the courtroom that day not just with her debts dismissed, but with a restored sense of dignity and love from the people around her. And as for me, I left knowing that while the law is a powerful tool, it's only justice when it is wielded with empathy and compassion.